Morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey. Good morning. It's a beautiful, sunny, you can see all the light coming in, sunny Friday morning right here in Georgia. We have a great broadcast planned for you. Let me see where my trusty co host David is. Let's see where he is. Let's see. There he is. Good morning, David.
Morning, Tamara.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Awesome, awesome. Guess who we have this morning?
Yeah, sounds really interesting.
Yes, we have the U.S. Senate candidate himself, Mr. Ted Terry. Good morning, Ted.
Good
Hey,
morning,
good,
Ted.
good morning. Good morning. How y'all doing?
We are
Doing
doing
good.
fabulous. Welcome to the broadcast. We do this every Friday where we talk all things Georgia, Georgia politics, what's going on around the country. And Ted, you are running for the U.S. Senate right here in the beautiful state of Georgia.
That's right. The beautiful state of Georgia. You got that right, Tamara.
Well, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So, Ted, you are currently the mayor of Clarkston. You've been around politics a long time. Me and you have stomped these campaign trails together over the years.
Yeah,
Now you are running for the U.S. Senate.
I am. I've been mayor of Clarkston, Georgia for 6 years. Small town in DeKalb County, just around the corner from where you're at. And I'm actually down here on Jekyll Island for a Georgia Municipal Association conference. I'm in the hotel lobby, as you can tell.
It's
um,
nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is one of the newer hotels on Jekyll. But yeah, and then just been campaigning down here on the coast, the beautiful Jekyll Island. And that's right. Yeah, I'm running for the United States Senate against David Perdue, who is up for re-election in 2020. David Perdue is the most anti-immigrant, most far-right conservative Republican senator that you've never heard of, because he's a freshman. He's only been in there for he's in his fifth year now in the Senate, but he basically has a close to 100% voting record with Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. He represents the NRA. He represents the corporate PACs, the corporate lobbyists, the fossil fuel companies that fund his campaign. And he is more interested in being Trump's right hand than representing the voice of Georgia. So I'm running against him to bring some courage back to Washington, and to bring a progressive voice, and the voice of, quite frankly, the largest voting bloc in America in 2020. That's the millennial voting bloc. 80 million Americans will be voting age eligible in the 2020 elections.
Congratulations for putting your hat in the ring against David Perdue. Mr. David Slavin.
Yeah. Well, we've got two things that I wanted to talk about. One of them is how does the intended resignation of Johnny Isaacson change the dynamics in the Georgia races for Senate, and also a much more gnarly question, if I might say, is how do you win white workers to this struggle for progressive change? And I ask that not to put you on the spot,
No,
not to
that's all
put
right.
me particularly on the spot,
Yeah.
but to say that I really think I've been noticing more and more that that Bernie Sanders really doesn't deal with this question directly, and so I'd like to have a conversation about the issue of the so-called white worker, and what does that what does that mean to you, and um, how do
Yeah.
you how do you
David asked you 10 questions.
but the
You can
first
start with whichever one you want to start with,
yeah.
Ted.
Yeah. I'll start with the first one, and then so we did hear on Tuesday that Johnny Isaacson will be retiring. Governor Kemp will appoint a replacement until a special election can be called. We expect the special election will be held at the same time as the general election for president for David Perdue's seat for Congress, basically everything in November 2020. And so I think how that basically affects the race is that now there's 2 Senate seats that are up for grabs and up for election here in Georgia. The margins in the U.S. Senate are very close. And so if the progressive agenda, if the Democratic agenda is to move forward, we're going to have to flip the Senate. And so that means that Georgia just became an even more of a battleground state than it ever was before, or what we thought it was going to shape up to be. So I would expect a lot of money to be spent in Georgia, us to get a lot of attention from the presidential candidates, and then ultimately the Democratic nominee. And I think that's good. I think that's an exciting thing because we have a lot of really a lot of important things to say here in Georgia about our point of view. And to get into the question you talked about white workers, I would argue that in a lot of ways, our American democracy, it is defined by the economic classes that we find ourselves in, that we try to reach. But I think also there's a lot of regionalism to the Democratic Party, and so I think what we're actually going to see is the voice of Georgians are going to be uplifted more than you've probably ever seen before, because the presidential candidates are going to want to win our state. And so that immediately means, what are the issues of working people in Georgia? Right now we know that we have a declining coal industry in terms of coal plants. Georgia Power has announced just in the last 3 to 4 years the closing of 3, 4, and maybe upwards of 5 coal plants, either shut or will be shut in the very near future. And those are parts of communities in Rome, Georgia, down in Plant McIntosh, down in Savannah, where people are going to be either taking out retirement buyouts. They might get moved to other parts of Georgia Power system, or they might just lose their job. And those tax revenues, that value that's been funneled into the school systems, into the healthcare systems in those parts of Georgia, are going to be impacted. And so, I talk a lot about, I'm a big proponent of the Green New Deal. I believe that a Green New Deal in Georgia would be incredibly impactful. And here's why. We don't have oil wells in Georgia. We don't have coal mines. We don't have, hardly any fracking. They're trying to explore fracking in North Georgia. But the reality is that our number one natural resource is the sun. And by investing in clean energy, we are talking about creating, over 100,000 new jobs that would be in the construction maintenance of solar plants, solar farms. These farms actually would, by and large, be put out in rural Georgia. That's where the land is the cheapest. That's where the sun, and where the crops are. And so, if you're a farmer, you know that you need land and sun. And so we've got opportunities to invest in parts of Georgia that, quite frankly, have been forgotten. And this is not just, a white part of Georgia or a black part of Georgia. I think these are counties that are just rural counties, and they've suffered a lot during the last 3-4 economic recessions. They've been struggling since the 1980s. And so I think there's an opportunity there to talk about a just and equitable transition. And that means the people that have been impacted the most by environmental pollution, fossil fuels, whose communities are being impacted by the transition away from dirty energy to clean energy, the people who can't afford their power bills, people who have the highest energy burden zip codes, those are the communities that have to benefit the first and foremost from this transition to clean energy. And so I'm looking forward to talking about that as I go up the trail. I think it's something that, you could argue that there's a lot of white workers who have been involved in the dirty fuel industry, but now have potentially opportunities to grow and to expand into this new clean energy economy.
I think David wanted you to dive in a little deeper.
No, I think that this is a really important place to start, because you're talking about rural investment, and that's really a critical factor in our state. The problem that I see is that as with the old New Deal, from the 1930s, from the Great Depression, that we have that the way that the old New Deal of the 1930s and 40s was restructured the economy, actually created greater inequality between black and white working people.
Right.
And I don't know how familiar you are with that. I don't want to go into a whole big deal, but Social Security, National Labor Relations Act, all of these things excluded the vast majority of black workers.
Yes.
It continued into the GI Bill because blacks were excluded from being in the army, or if they were completely segregated into blacks only units, usually with white officers, and were dishonorably discharged at much higher rates than whites. And then when they came out, they couldn't get the loans that to borrow money for new homes. And so the emergence of segregated suburbs with the industries like the auto industry moving out to those suburbs cut off black people from getting those jobs. So we created the New Deal, actually created the structure of racial inequality in for the next 3 generations since the 1950s.
So David, I think where you're going is, how do you create this Green New Deal and not do the same damage that the New Deal did? Like, what is your take on that, Ted?
Yeah, exactly. That's the big question now, it seems to me. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. I have studied the New Deal. I'm a big fan of a gentleman named Henry Wallace, who was FDR's Secretary of Commerce and Agriculture during the New Deals, and really actually was on the forefront of trying to close the discriminatory and racial gaps that were existing in the New Deal. And then FDR, someone who he wanted this Henry Wallace to become the vice president, but was blocked by the Southern segregationists, because they knew that Henry Wallace was going to expedite and accelerate integration and racial healing in our country. He gave a really famous speech called "The Century of the Common Man," and he talks a lot about the people of the world, the people who are under the thumbs of dictators and oppression, who don't have freedom, who don't have liberty, who don't have rights. That there could have been an opportunity to bring people together around these universal basic human rights, and I think that's something that's guided my my thinking of how I got involved in politics, and living in a place like Clarkston, Georgia, being 82% non-white, a place with people from 40 different nationalities speaking 60 languages, all the major religions. In such a small town, it's provided me a very interesting lens of how not just black and white, Americans, view themselves and view their place in society, but also how, immigrants and refugees and new Americans and people from around the world see themselves and how they see America. And it's always very interesting to get reactions from people who aren't from America when they come to America, what they expect America to be, and then what their experiences are. And it's clear that in this country, we are not. There is a color bias. Just the color of your skin impacts how you are treated in a society. I hear that from African refugees. When I talk to people from the Rohingya Burma, they're a darker complexion Burmese than other Burmese, and it's part of the reason why they were forced out of the Rakhine state, and a genocide was perpetuated against them in these last couple years by the Burmese government, pushing 1 million Rohingya into Bangladesh because of that racial and then also religious um, uh, bias and racism. And so, it is very interesting. I think what I will say, what I have learned, and this is just more speaking for broadly with our politics and what I try to do when I meet with people, is we have to try find ways for more dialogue. And dialogue means talking with people, not with the intent to persuade them your point of view, but to understand where they're coming from. And it's one of the great things about being a mayor is, you don't have a party affiliation next to your name. I just run as myself. And so, my job is to represent everyone in my town. And I, have to listen to people who disagree with me, because I live there. They come to council meetings, they come to town hall meetings, they see me at the local coffee shops. And that's something that actually I think is missing a lot, particularly from Senator David Perdue. He has never had a town hall meeting. He is afraid to interact with people that probably would, call him out on some of the votes he's made and the things he stands for. But that's the job of a senator. That's the job of a representative, is to actually represent all of your people, all of Georgia, and to actually go and try to listen to them and try to find that common ground. And if you have the mindset of, I'm not going to listen to anyone who disagrees with me, then you will only have that perspective that is a small slice of this larger American, democracy. And so, whether it's understanding white workers or black workers or immigrants and new Americans, we have to have a candidate, one with the experience and then the desire to interact with people who are not like them, and to listen to those points of view.
Here's the conundrum that I see, Ted.
Okay.
You have inequality, structural inequality, which apparently benefits white workers over black workers. It's certainly preferences. It gives them preferential access to all sorts of issues, all sorts of opportunities. I think that what we as progressives need to face is that we're trying to do two things at once. One is appeal to solidarity across, the vast majority of people in this state and in the country who are working people. They don't own businesses. They're not capitalists, and they are at the same time they are not only separate, they are unequal in the way that they are divided up. And it seems to me that we collectively, as progressives, have to figure out a way to square that circle, to address the fact that white workers have been appealed to by Republicans, and to a certain extent by Democrats as well, to say that protecting your privilege, your position as whites, is more important to your well-being and your future than identifying with the working class. And if we can't figure out a way to challenge the notion that what they are receiving is benefits, all right, there are real material differences. That is what perpetuates this whole thing. But why, working people are not stupid, but if we don't present them with a challenge to the Republican view that if they can just keep together as whites with the ruling elite, right, and build a wall, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. Yeah. Build a wall. Keep your neighborhoods white. Keep your jobs. Keep black people from getting jobs in the shops and offices where you work. Then you can continue to maintain this differential, and that's really all that you can do. You can't get ahead. I mean, we see that. I mean, objectively, that's the reality. Is wages have not improved for 50 years. The concentration of wealth continues to increase. So what I'm asking here is and I don't see it. I don't see really that issue being addressed by Bernie Sanders or by anyone else who is in the progressive movement. And that's where I think I don't have answers. I'm not saying that I have answers. I'm just saying this seems to me to be the $64 question. This is the anyway. Go ahead.
Well, let me try to answer that. Although I think you're exactly right. It is a very it is a tough political question. Republicans have clearly chosen to go with the if the message of white people become the minority, then white people become persecuted and will achieve minority status. And what I can say, just sort of broadly. Number one, the policies that we have to push forward need to be universal. They need to be able to be, people, regardless of, of where you come from or what life you're born into, that you have access to basic fundamental rights, access to universal health care, debt-free college, a job guarantee through a Green New Deal, through voting access and voting rights, a living minimum wage. Right now, we're saying $15, which is what should be the living wage.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you just about my experience in Clarkston, I'm the minority in Clarkston. I'm in the less than 20% that are white residents in the city of Clarkston. And that transition took place over 40 years. Clarkston used to be a small rural majority white town. It was white and black, 80% white, 20%, 80% white, 20% black. And now it is, all the racial and ethnic groups, from around the world are in this, concentrated area. And, you would think that, if you had, a mosque across the street from a Buddhist temple, around the corner from a Baptist church and an AME church and an Ethiopian Orthodox church, all in 1 square mile, that there would be these religious conflicts and wars. And you would think that, that's what people, politicians would tell you, is that we can't live and coexist when we have all these different values and cultural beliefs. But, what I can say in Clarkston is that we have proven that just at least in terms of the structure, in terms of the freedoms that we have in America, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, these are elements that have created, at least in our city, a paradigm where people get along and have mutual respect for each other. And at the underlying, principle of that is compassion, it's love, it's being inclusive, it's being welcoming, and understanding that we're never going to understand everyone's, perspective or point of view, but we're going to try to do that. We're going to try to do that by listening, by challenging ourselves. Step outside our comfort zone. Every time I've been receiving delegations from, for over 30 international delegations since I've been mayor from around the world, who have come to Clarkston, for us to learn from each other. And these are communities around the world that are becoming more and more diverse because of the unprecedented migratory challenges. Over 100 million people are in flight around the world, and it is disrupting societies and communities all over. 10,000 people in a caravan coming up, from Central America. Well, let's remember there's 1 million Syrians fleeing Syria, walking their way into Europe. So we are not alone in experiencing this migratory crisis that is forcing people who are from different backgrounds and cultures to interact with each other. And one of the things I would always tell these international visitors, I would quote Mark Twain. He said that travel is fatal to bigotry, prejudice, and narrow-mindedness, and that one cannot develop broad, wholesome views of the world by vegetating in one's own corner for one's entire life. The bumper stickers, travel is the only cure for ignorance. And you could take that many ways. You could say travel around the world and interact with things that you didn't even know existed. But I would also say in the vein of Clarkston, travel in terms of take one step out of your comfort zone, and you have the opportunity in a place like our town to meet Muslims, to meet refugees, to meet people who are from Ethiopia, who are from the original. Clarkston had one of the original free. After the Emancipation Proclamation, one of the first free Black communities in DeKalb County was in Clarkston. And you can tap into so much history and culture, and you can learn from each other. And what we have learned in our city is the more time, the greater proximity that we have to people who are different, in whatever category and way you want to say, the more that it enlightens us, it allows us to expand our mind, and bigotry and prejudice fall away.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Ted.
Before you dive in, David, let me introduce Egberto Willies. He has joined us on the broadcast. He is out in Texas, and he gives us a national political update. So before you dive in, let's let Egberto say hi to Ted.
Ted,
hey, Egberto.
Look, it's a pleasure meeting you. You are the kind of progressive that I've been hoping that we get throughout the country, because most Americans really want progressive values. We have allowed the old folk to taint what it really means. I like that you are one of those unabashedly progressive guys out there that go out there and it's not scared. What I would hope that you're doing is going into those rural communities in Georgia as well, and tell them folks out there that they're being screwed by the people who are currently running the system. Because I think one of the problems with progressives is we don't go out there and tell the message as is. Perdue is killing Georgians. Perdue is killing Georgians. I hope you have that in your repertoire.
That's true. Senator Perdue represents Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump. He represents the largest corporations and corporate interests in the country, and they have profited trillions of dollars off the backs of working people, and whether it's farmers suffering from this trade war, people. I'm out here on the coast on Jekyll Island, and one of the top concerns is climate change. They're already seeing more storms, more flooding, more money they're having to spend from their own local tax dollars to protect themselves and make a more resilient infrastructure in their cities, and this is where they live. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. Like my goal, I will have visited all 159 counties in Georgia by the time this election is over. I've almost visited all of them just in my previous work, working for the labor movement and the environmental movement these last several years. But yeah, we're gonna go right to the people. We're gonna engage them. We're not gonna just talk to Democrats, but we're gonna talk to people who haven't been engaged. I sat down with Stacey Abrams on Tuesday. And her number one piece of advice, which when she said it, I was like, "You are totally right," is go and talk to people who no one talks to. There's hundreds of thousands of voters, Black, white, Hispanic, new American, newly registered, people who have just moved here, who aren't in the usual voting voter targeting pool, and so they kind of get left over. They get sort of bombarded by the airwaves, but people don't actually go and talk to them face to face in their communities. And so that's how we're going to win. We're going to win by engaging people who have been forgotten.
May I suggest you do a photo op at one of the many Georgia hospitals that were closed in rural areas because of the not accepting the Medicaid advantage to the Affordable Care Act? I think people need to see the results of their votes, and that may, it's just a suggestion.
That's so true. Yeah, it really is really tragic how the rural healthcare system has suffered. Counties that voted for Brian Kemp and David Perdue in the past, are really being hurt by hospitals closing, and by just the lack of primary care physicians, and just basic healthcare access and dental access, and optometry access. I mean, the basic, what I'm saying is a basic human right of access to healthcare, and to be able to go see a doctor, to take care of your ailments and not go bankrupt and not have to, miss work or risk being fired because you have an ailment. And so, yeah, that's a really good point, Egbert. So I'll be sure to keep that in mind.
Ted, I am not, being so critical because I'm against you. I'm for you. I'm trying to figure out ways to talk to folks who may be initially resistant, but who are real potential, partners and people who could be in solidarity with this movement, where they have identified so far, they have identified in the last generation the Democratic Party with Black people, right, in Georgia. That's really been a racial divide, and I'm really hoping that that you and I and other people can continue to have this conversation about how to reach them in a way that both acknowledges the inequality and the privilege, of their position, but at the same time can really show them and argue with them. And you're absolutely right. This is going to take a lot of listening, but to lead them to an understanding that they're better off in solidarity. And I mean, in rural Georgia, a lot of the land has been taken away from Black folks and given to white folks, right? I mean, that's part of what's been happening. So there's a real potential for both, racializing the land question, and at the same time opening up the possibility, as you put forward. I mean, my mind is really just expanding on the idea about how the Green New Deal could affect the rural Georgia, how productive it could be. But to do that, there has to be first of all, some truth and reconciliation, right? And
well,
secondly,
David, can I
some
jump
way
in on that?
of you can't simply leave it at that. You have to address the issues of the ways in which inequality have affected the rural Black Georgia, and at the same time raise the issue with white farmers and workers who are out there, that they would actually be better off. They're not doing well, and that part of the reason for that is the way in which the structural inequality has rendered all the working people powerless, right? So that's really, and that's going to be very granular. That's going to be every conversation that you have, every county that you visit. It really. Egberto is absolutely right. One of the ways in which the rural Georgia has been really damaged is the refusal to accept Medicaid expansion, and those are not just medical facilities that are being lost. There are jobs that are being lost, right? Some of the best jobs in rural Georgia are those that are in the medical. I don't want to tell you your business because you know this better than I do, but it really is that's the struggle, it seems to me, and it's if we ignore it, if we just appeal to universalism, we're really not addressing what the Republicans are saying to these folks, right? You know what I mean? We're not really engaging the little green devil's message, that's being whispered in their ear. And by the green devil, I mean, Perdue and Kemp and Isaacson, for that matter, and all of the Republicans in the state.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm not giving you any answers here. I think that your start
David, let me jump in.
To listen to people.
Hey, go for it, Tamara. Let's hear it. What do you say, Tamara?
I said, David, let me jump in.
I can't see her. I think is she? She's still on?
Yeah, I can hear her.
I can see you. David, it's probably David's computer.
David, you can't see me. You can hear me?
Oh, yeah. I can't see you, Tamara. Tamara.
It's Tamara. So Ted, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
I've been trying to find my.
If you guys, I'll shut up if I've got a black screen here. for
Oh,
Tamara.
no.
Go
Okay.
ahead and refresh, David.
What's that?
Go ahead and refresh your screen so that you can see that we're all here still.
Maybe log out and log. Tell him to log out and log
Log
in.
out and log back in.
Yeah.
What's that?
Log out and log back in.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So
There you
I
go,
wanted to
Tamara.
ask you. I wanted to ask you about ADOS, the whole ADOS movement. I know you know a little bit about it. Hopefully, you know a lot about it. But if you don't, I will surely bring you up to speed. And reparations. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, yep. So, okay, so on number one, we have HR 8 that would create.
HR 40.
I'm sorry, HR 40.
HR 40.
So that would create the study committee. So that's something that's been put in the hopper in the House for almost 20 years now. So that's long overdue. There was a mention earlier about reconciliation. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that there is a lack of history and education, historical education that's being taught in our schools, but also in our society about what happened during the Civil War, Reconstruction, and then Jim Crow era up until it's in a lot of ways there's things that are happening now that are still vestiges of Jim Crow. And Jim Crow, things are happening around the country, not just in the South. And so, I was reminded about a year ago, I was listening to On the Media, which is an NPR show, and they went to the American Lynching Museum in Alabama, and and had a really powerful discussion about how a lot of people don't understand what actually happened during the amount of terrorism, the death toll, the brutality that existed in every single county, particularly in the South. And it is quite possible that you can go to all 159 counties in Georgia, and you can be made aware of a place in that county where a lynching took place of a Black person. And a lot of people just don't know that. And so when you talk about reparations, people, think that that things weren't that bad. I'll use the example of the aftermath of Nazi Germany, the genocide that happened during and up until the end of World War II. Germany as a country has made sure that its society has never forgotten what happened in the Holocaust. They have perpetuated almost 70 years of reconciliation for previous and for current and future generations. And so we have to acknowledge that there has not been true reconciliation because we haven't even truly informed our people about what actually happened during this 150 years of terror that existed. And I think with that lens and that context, I think that a lot of people would say, yeah, there's some real issues, government sponsored, sponsored by the federal government, by state governments, by local governments, by our nation, that were systemic racial terrorism, racial inequality that was put forward through legal policies. And so one thing I can say, as the study committee is happening and they're looking at sort of the breadth of reparations, the one thing that I can point to right now and that I would support would be a National Fair Share Housing Act. There's a really great book that goes much deeper into the issue of housing segregation and discrimination in our country, The Color of Law. It came out about a year ago. He makes the case for housing reparations, or reparations through housing remedies, because we know that there are people today that are living today, and whether they're your grandparents, parents, or you yourself, that are being discriminated by exclusionary zoning policies, and then if you go back to redlining, and just the racial discrimination from the realtor community, from housing development authorities. We can point to the governments at all different levels, um, putting Black Americans into substandard housing, into housing that only they could afford near factories or pollution sites or landfills. And so there's a strong case to be made there that the government needs to make up for the fact that the greatest generational wealth building tool of the middle class was through home ownership and through affordable housing. And that's something that has systematically hurt Black Americans. I think you can point to Hispanic neighborhoods and how there's some discrimination there currently happening, but that is one part of our country where you can say that the government deliberately passed policies that make sure that Black Americans could not have access to affordable and fair housing. And so that's something through a federal act that we can begin to address immediately. There's a lot of really interesting proposals, but I think the strongest one would be to use the federal housing subsidies and tax credits. And if local municipalities and county commissions, if they don't update their exclusive zoning laws, if they don't create more opportunities for a greater mix of housing opportunities, more affordable housing and housing access, then they shouldn't receive federal dollars. And so this is one area where through a federal act, we can actually force states and local communities to create policies that are going to right that wrong and to balance the equation so that people all over have access to housing.
Ted, that is exactly the kind of issue that we need to learn or figure out how to address white working people, with an understanding of that this is really in their interest, that equality is actually in their interest, that making restitution will help them. If you we could just throw into the mix a few things like the subprime loans before 2008, that were directed at African American and Hispanic Americans, targeting them when they could have qualified for prime rate loans. The other thing that I've mentioned a few times that goes back in history a little bit is the 1949 Federal Housing Act, which was an attempt to by the Truman administration to create a subsidized housing in the cities where the jobs were. And the real estate lobby and the banking lobbies, the banking industries lobbied heavily in favor of keeping the requirements to as poor, as low an income as possible, because they were building all of these single-family homes out in the suburbs, right? And so they did not want the white workers to remain in the cities. And if you think about what that might have meant, federally subsidized housing across the country in cities, what that might have meant for retaining the tax base of the city, so that it wasn't the extremes of rich and poor that remained in the cities. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we need to, I think, capture the imagination of all the folks that we're dealing with. If we could restore the land, land ownership to Black, landowners in Georgia, that would mean the base of small farmers, as opposed to the corporate farmers, would be much stronger, and the agricultural interests would be represented more by small farmers than by corporate farmers, right? I mean, that's.
David, can you hear me now? Can you hear me and see me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Egberto is on his way out. Egberto, I want you to jump in and we'll lead you out. And thank you for joining us. Egberto does a show, a national show, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on Instagram, Periscope, YouTube. He's everywhere, Ted Terry.
Okay, great. Have me on the show, Egberto.
Any day.
Yeah.
Now let me just say first thing. It's inspiring to see a young man like you out there working and being a part of the thing. Now having David and you as two white guys in Georgia in the Democratic Party working, I think is a hell of an asset. I'm going to tell you just quite bluntly, use your whiteness to bring in some more white men and to really make this party a complete party, because I don't think we're going to make it unless everybody feel inclusive. What the Republican Party has done a good job as is making white men feel like they're victims. Amazing. How could that possibly be? Something that needs to be changed. But I want to close out. If Tamara can give me 60 seconds here, I'd like to close out and say that let's be careful with what's going on in the Democratic Party with Biden. What's going on right now is everybody understands that we could put up, as a reporter on NBC said, we could put up a set of edible fruit to run against Donald Trump in next year, and it will likely win. The Democratic Party establishment then is running scared. Why are they running scared? Because finally, progressives could really make a dent in the system, meaning progressives could be elected from coast to the Midwest, all over, because people have seen how bad things are. The Democratic Party establishment and the Republican Party establishment are not very different in that they are owed to the plutocracy as such. They don't want you, Senor Ted Terry. They don't want a whole lot of progressives out there. What they want to do is bring Biden for the Bidenification of the Democratic Party, to keep it just centered. We don't want it there. So I hope that everybody out there goes for the fight and realize that it is a time for progressives. Forget about Biden. Let's move on to anybody who's going to move us left. Tamara, thank you so kindly for giving me the opportunity to say this on your show.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, you can find Egberto Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Instagram, Periscope, YouTube. This man is everywhere. Politics done right with Egberto Willies. Thank you, sir.
Nice meeting you, Ted. Bye, David.
Bye, Egberto.
Yeah, so I'm bringing you all the way live, Mr. Ted Terry. I want to ask you a couple more questions.
Okay.
Mass incarceration. What is your stance on mass incarceration? We have a lot of black and brown people that are filling up our prisons and our jails across this country. I know you've made some initiative. You were the first city the city of Clarkston was the first city in Georgia to decriminalize marijuana. So definitely talk about that, please.
That's right. That's right. So, I'll start by just with my record here. And so, I've been aware of mass incarceration and the fact that America imprisons more human beings than, almost every other country. I want to say like Russia and China are close to us, but I think we're on the top. And a lot of those people who are incarcerated there for nonviolent offenses, for lack of being able to make bail, for misdemeanor crimes, for simple drug possession. And so when I became mayor, I, recognizing that I, had power and had the ability to enact policies, we began to ask the question, what can we do as a small town to try to reduce mass incarceration? And we did a lot of research, and we soon discovered that Georgia law gives municipalities the ability to decide how they, from a policy perspective, and an administrative policy, how they treat simple possession of marijuana. And so we simply passed an ordinance that said that if an officer, finds someone with less than 1 ounce possession of marijuana, the policy is to give them a $75 ticket and be on their way. No arrest, no car being towed, no night spent in jail, no arraignment at the next day at DeKalb County court system. It was designed to be a ticket-only offense that doesn't show up on your record, akin to a parking violation or a traffic ticket. And this was the one thing that we thought that we could do just in terms of our police policy. We wanted our police to focus more on stopping real crimes and to build community policing. And knowing that this policy was passed and our residents knowing about it, it expanded the cooperation and the opportunity for our officers to spend more time with the people that they are there to serve and protect. And it created, I think, a lot of goodwill between the community and the police, something that I think continues to this day. I'm also very proud that when we passed this ordinance, a lot of people said that it couldn't be done, that what we were doing was wrong, that it was illegal. The Governor Nathan Deal at the time, threatened to send state patrol to Clarkston to arrest people on misdemeanor, possession of marijuana. And of course, that never happened. They said that we would become a drug haven, and that didn't happen. We're actually, in the last several years, Clarkston's been ranked one of the top 50 safest cities in Georgia. And so we proved them wrong. And now today, over 10 cities around the state of Georgia have passed similar ordinances. Atlanta, city of South Fulton, Macon, Savannah, Augusta, even the small town of Ludowici, Georgia, down here in southeast Georgia, have all passed these decriminalizations. It's covering almost 1 million people in Georgia. And so I'm very proud to have kicked off that movement, but we have to take it to the next level. We need a senator who's not just going to say that we need to decriminalize and legalize and regulate cannabis, but who has a record of actually getting things done and saying that, that this is not something that I'm taking a policy stance on because now I'm running for Senate. It's what I have been fighting for my entire, adult life. And I'll say one more thing about mass incarceration. We have got to end the prison labor system in this country. There are places, many people have been messaging me about the fact that Columbus, Georgia, has had the largest prison work camp force in the entire state of Georgia, almost 800 people. Most of those people are in on low-level charges. They are the public works crew at the city of Columbus. They pick up the trash, and probably most insulting is they maintain the golf courses. And the fact that these people are making either $0 or maybe $12 a day, is slave labor. And look, and here's the reality, that system has been in place for almost 140 years. It goes back to after Reconstruction. And so that is a clear line, a clear vestige of Jim Crow that still exists. And it's existed in Columbus for 140 plus years, and it still exists to this day. All right. And so that means that previous mayors of Columbus, current mayors of Columbus, had the power to say, you know what, yes, we are saving millions of dollars in our city budget, but it's the wrong thing to do. And we've got to end prison labor. And so I encourage all, prison labor, policies that exist in Georgia at the municipal and the county level. In those policies right now, pay prison laborers a fair wage, and then actually create policies that when they enter back into society, that if they've been doing that job for your city, you offer them a $15 minimum wage. In Clarkston, we have a $15 minimum wage for our city employees. And so a really straightforward policy, if you want to try to do it in a measured way, would be to welcome those people who have been doing those jobs into the city workforce. And it would be a graduated decline of prison labor, and then actually giving people a living wage job when they re-enter into society. And so that's how you stop mass incarceration. One, you just stop arresting people for things that aren't right. You quit imprisoning people for these low-level offenses. And then when they serve their time, you take it as an opportunity for rehabilitation to get them back into society and set them up for success. Try to find ways to get them a living wage when they re-enter society. It's going to prevent reincarceration.
That's great, Ted. I really, that's just things that I didn't know about. I mean, Columbus, that is just, have the golf courses maintained by prison labor. I'm assuming you mean municipal golf courses, right? It's not private golf courses, because that would be contract labor the way that they did during Jim Crow. But those are really, really wonderful suggestions. That is a policy I think that everybody could get behind. And there are just a couple of observations that I would have around my own research is that, for one thing, the prison system in this country could not survive, could not financially survive without this free or pittance paid labor, unpaid labor of the inmates. The inmates actually are the ones who allow the system to work, because otherwise the costs of running and maintaining prisons would be so high that that there would be a taxpayer revolt. So that's one thing. The other thing is that in the Deep South, South Carolina, Georgia, probably Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, there are much higher rates of incarceration for whites than in the rest of the country. And I think that that's a really important consideration to begin to raise some of the issues of solidarity. That there is a minority of poor white families who are suffering under this system and have the have the same issues about coming out of prison and not having jobs, not having records, being on the records, having a criminal record. But the point is that we could really address those issues of changing what's happening in prison, which really in Georgia prisons are horrific.
Let me jump in real quick. We got about 3 minutes left in the broadcast. Ted, this has been a phenomenal. I mean, I'm just happy you're running. I'm really happy you're running. But I have two things I want to ask before you go. Number one is closing of the racial wealth gap, and then the second question that I'm going to ask Ted: when you get elected to the U.S. Senate, do you intend to introduce some sort of reparation bill, some sort of initiative when you are elected? So those are the two questions that I have for you.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. And so, yes, I would support and sponsor or co-sponsor HR 40. It would create the study committee. I think that, that's something that we could do right away. And then, and I think, again, going back to this federal Fair Share Housing Act, this is something that we can draw a direct line of de jure segregation in this country, there should be some reconciliation and reparations on. And so these are people who are living today that need to be made whole because of the discrimination that prevented them from building generational wealth. And so yes, reparations through housing remedies would be my number one bill that I think is actually a very pragmatic and fair thing to start with. And then closing the racial wealth gap, look, I mean, I think, again, going back to the fact that in many parts of this country, if you are a minimum wage worker, you cannot afford a one-bedroom apartment. If you are a minimum wage worker, you cannot afford a two-bedroom apartment in any county. There's like 13 counties in America where you can afford a one-bedroom apartment with a minimum wage salary. And so this is where housing and raising the minimum wage come into play. So we have to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. There's a bill that's already passed the House that would graduatively increase that. Also creating more affordable housing. The rent is too damn high in so many different places. It has a lot to do with the housing tax credits and zoning laws. There's ways that we can create better incentives to create more affordable housing, more dynamic housing options. In Clarkston, we were the first city in Georgia to pass a tiny home development ordinance. So we're actually building the first tiny home neighborhood in the state of Georgia. It also allows cottage homes as well. And so we have better home ownership opportunities by creating different scales of housing instead of just building luxury townhomes. The mixed-use high-rise service mansion. That's what most of the money is going to in the housing industry right now. It's not going towards smaller and medium-sized homes that would be more affordable to a lot of people. We have to address the energy burden. There's several zip codes in the Atlanta area, and even on the coast down here near Savannah, where people are paying upwards of 7 to 10% of their monthly income on their utility bill. And so by transitioning to a clean energy economy, right, we can actually reduce, power bill, something that is not a fixed cost. It's something that keeps going up every day. And then finally, I would support the Workplace Democracy Act. That would allow for collective bargaining across whole sectors of our society. It would empower workers, whether they're in the fast food industry, whether they're in the manufacturing sector, whether they're in trucking. It would allow for workers to collectively bargain. And I think if you look at all those three issues, those are all areas where if we pass those bills and pass these policies, I think that you would see the racial wealth gap be diminished and it become more in line and parity with white workers.
Well, thank you, Ted. I hope that you come back as this race heats up. There's other candidates out there, but Ted, you are a friend to this broadcast. Please come back and join us things get going. Please come back. David?
Yeah.
This was a great broadcast.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, David.
Yeah, great to meet you, Ted. I mean, this is really you're inspiring. Really appreciate your program as well as how well you articulate it. Cool.
Yeah, very good. All right, thanks so much, guys. Enjoy
Thank you. You can support Ted at tedforgeorgia.com. Go make a contribution, become a volunteer. Again, his website is tedforgeorgia.com. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey. You can find us at tamaraforgeorgia.com. You can find Mr. Egberto Willies at politicsdoneright.com. You can always find Mr. David Slavin right here on Facebook at Acknowledge the Divide. Thank you. We'll see you next week.